The carriage wheels had barely stopped turning when Aloan heard the whispers start. She stepped down onto the gravel path of Blackmore Hall, her heart pounding, and saw a row of cold faces waiting for her. At the center stood Lady Cordelia, sister to the Duke, her smile sharp as a blade. Aloan was to marry the Duke of Rothsmere in 1 month, but nobody here wanted her. Her family had lost their fortune, and this marriage was the only thing standing between them and ruin. She was not born into wealth like the women staring at her now, and they made sure she felt it with every glance. Inside the grand hall, Aloan was given a small room far from the family quarters, though she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was often stronger than an argument. At dinner, the women spoke about horses, jewels, and parties she had never attended, and every time she tried to join the conversation, someone changed the subject before she could finish a sentence. The Duke himself was absent, buried in matters of his estate, unaware of how his bride was being treated in his own home. Cordelia watched Aloan carefully over the following days, searching for a weakness to exploit. She noticed how Aloan walked past the stables every morning, pausing at the fence to watch the horses run in the field. There was something different in the way she looked at them, something that unsettled Cordelia more than she wanted to admit. It was not fear in her eyes. It was recognition, as if she understood something about those animals that no one else in the house did. That evening, Cordelia gathered the other women in the drawing room, speaking in a hushed voice about the upcoming hunt. It was a tradition at Blackmore, one that tested every rider's skill in front of the entire family and their guests. She smiled as she suggested, almost too casually, which horse should be given to their newest guest. The name that left her lips brought a ripple of quiet laughter through the room. It was a horse no one dared to ride, one that had thrown every stable hand who tried to tame it. Aloan was informed the next morning that she had been chosen to ride in the hunt, a gesture presented to her as an honor. She thanked them politely, though something in Cordelia's expression told her this was no kindness. She asked which horse would be hers, and when she heard the name, she saw the flicker of anticipation in the eyes around her. She did not flinch. She only nodded and asked what time the hunt would begin, refusing to give them the reaction they were hoping to see. That night, alone in her small room, Aloan sat by the window and thought of her childhood home, far from these grand halls and cruel smiles. She thought of the fields where she had once worked with horses far wilder than anything Blackmore could offer. A quiet determination settled over her. Whatever they believed they were about to witness, she intended to prove them wrong before the sun set the following day. The stables at Blackmore stood at the edge of a wide green field, and by dawn they were already filled with noise and movement. Grooms rushed between stalls, preparing horses for the guests who had begun arriving in fine coats and polished boots. Cordelia moved among them with practiced ease, giving quiet instructions to the head groom, a nervous young man named Elias who had worked at the estate for only a few months. She told him exactly which horse belonged to the Duke's bride, and reminded him, with a tone that left no room for argument, that no other animal would do. Elias hesitated before saddling the horse called Tempest, a tall gray animal known throughout the county for throwing every rider unfortunate enough to sit upon his back. Even the most experienced hunters at Blackmore refused to approach him without caution. Elias had seen grown men limp away from that stall, and the thought of placing a new bride, unfamiliar with the estate, onto such a horse filled him with unease. Yet he said nothing, afraid of losing his position if he defied Lady Cordelia's wishes. When Aloan arrived at the stables that morning dressed in a simple riding habit she had brought from her old home, she saw Tempest immediately. The horse stood apart from the others, ears pinned back, muscles tense beneath his gray coat. A small crowd had already gathered nearby, guests who had heard whispers of what was being arranged, eager to see what would happen. Aloan felt their eyes on her, waiting, hopping for a spectacle. She walked toward Tempest slowly, without hesitation in her steps, though her heart beat faster than she let show on her face. The horse turned his head, nostrils flaring, and for a moment the entire stable seemed to hold its breath. Aloan reached out her hand, palm open, and spoke softly, words too quiet for anyone else to hear. Something in her voice made the horse pause, his ears shifting forward instead of back. Cordelia watched from a distance, arms crossed, a satisfied smile playing at her lips as she waited for the inevitable disaster. She had chosen this horse precisely because no one could tame him, certain that within moments the new bride would be humiliated in front of the entire hunting party. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that Aloan had spent her childhood among horses just like Tempest, animals dismissed as dangerous simply because no one had taken the time to understand them. As the horns sounded to signal the start of the hunt, Aloan swung herself onto Tempest's back with a calm confidence that startled everyone watching. The horse shifted beneath her, testing her resolve, but she held steady, her hands gentle yet firm on the reins. The crowd murmured in surprise, unprepared for what they were witnessing. Cordelia's smile faltered slightly as the hunting party began to move forward across the wide open field, and Aloan rode among them, upright and unshaken, toward whatever challenges the day still held. The hunting party spread across the countryside in a wave of galloping hooves and shouting riders, following the hounds as they raced ahead through the tall grass. Aloan kept Tempest at a steady pace, letting the horse find his rhythm beneath her, sensing the tension slowly leaving his powerful frame. She had noticed something in the way he moved, a kind of restless energy that spoke not of a wild temper, but of a horse who had never been given the chance to trust anyone. She leaned forward slightly, murmuring words of encouragement, and felt him respond with a smoothness that surprised even her. Around them, other riders pushed their horses hard, eager to take the lead and prove their skill in front of the watching guests. Cordelia rode near the front of the group, glancing back occasionally to check on Aloan, expecting to see her struggling or, better yet, already fallen behind. Instead, she saw a woman who appeared entirely at ease, guiding her horse with quiet precision through the uneven terrain. The sight unsettled her more than she wanted to admit, and she pushed her own horse faster, determined to widen the distance between them. As the hunt moved toward a stretch of dense woodland, most of the riders slowed their pace, wary of the narrow paths and low branches that made the route dangerous. Aloan studied the trees ahead and noticed a faint trail cutting through the woods, one that seemed to curve back toward the open fields on the other side. It was a shortcut, though a risky one, requiring a rider to trust both their horse and their own judgment completely. She had used trails like this before, back when she trained horses on her family's land, learning to read the land as carefully as she read the animals beneath her. Without announcing her intentions, Aloan guided Tempest toward the narrow trail, leaving the main group behind. Some of the guests noticed and called out in surprise, unsure whether she had lost her way or simply lost her nerve. Cordelia turned in her saddle just in time to see the bride disappear between the trees, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine that Aloan had made a terrible mistake, one that would surely end her humiliating attempt at proving herself. But inside the woods, Aloan felt something shift within her, a familiar calm settling over her senses as the trees blurred past on either side. Tempest moved beneath her with growing confidence, his earlier tension replaced by something closer to trust. She guided him around fallen branches and over small streams, her focus sharp and unwavering, while behind her the sound of the other riders grew fainter and fainter, swallowed by the rustling leaves and the steady rhythm of hooves against soft earth. Aloan emerged from the woodland trail onto the open field just as the sun broke fully through the morning clouds, casting long light across the grass. Ahead of her lay the final stretch of the hunt, a wide meadow leading toward the old stone bridge where the entire party was meant to gather at the end of the ride. She was alone, with no one in sight behind or ahead, and for a moment she allowed herself a small breath of relief, patting Tempest gently on the neck as he carried her forward with steady, confident strides. Back on the main path, the rest of the hunting party struggled through difficult terrain that had slowed their progress considerably. One rider's horse stumbled crossing a shallow ditch, forcing several others to stop and offer assistance. Another guest lost control briefly when her horse spooked at a fallen branch, though she managed to steady the animal without serious trouble. Cordelia pressed forward impatiently, growing increasingly frustrated as the delays piled up, her earlier confidence beginning to crack under the weight of uncertainty about what had become of Elowen. When the main group finally reached the meadow leading to the stone bridge, they were met with a sight none of them expected. Elowen sat calmly atop Tempest near the finish point, having already crossed the distance well ahead of everyone else. Servants and guests who had gathered to watch the hunt's conclusion stood in stunned silence, whispering among themselves as they realized what had happened. The bride, given the estate's most unmanageable horse in what was meant to be a cruel joke, had not only survived the hunt, but had finished it before any other rider. Cordelia arrived moments later, her face pale with disbelief as she took in the scene before her. She had expected humiliation, perhaps even a serious accident, anything but this quiet, composed victory. The other guests began to murmur with genuine admiration, some even applauding softly as Elowen dismounted with the same calm grace she had shown throughout the entire ride. She thanked Elias, who had rushed forward to take the reins, with a warmth that made the young groom's guilt over the morning's arrangement even harder to bear. It was then that the Duke himself arrived, having ridden out separately to inspect the estate boundaries, and only just returning in time to witness the end of the hunt. He looked at his bride, flushed and triumphant atop the horse everyone feared, and then at his sister, whose carefully composed expression could not hide the truth flickering behind her eyes. Something in the air shifted, a quiet understanding passing among the gathered guests that far more had happened that morning than a simple test of riding skill. That evening, as the household gathered for dinner, the atmosphere inside Blackmore Hall felt different from any night before. Word of what had happened during the hunt had spread quickly among the staff, and Elias, unable to carry the weight of his guilt any longer, approached the Duke privately before the meal began. With trembling hands, he explained everything, how Lady Cordelia had instructed him to saddle Tempest for the new bride, fully aware of the horse's dangerous reputation and the risk it posed to someone unfamiliar with the estate. The Duke listened in silence, his expression darkening with each word Elias spoke. He thanked the young groom for his honesty, assuring him he would face no punishment for finally telling the truth, then made his way toward the dining hall where the family and guests had already gathered. Cordelia sat near the head of the table, engaged in polite conversation, unaware that her carefully constructed scheme had just unraveled entirely. When the Duke entered, his presence commanded immediate attention, and the room fell quiet as he addressed his sister directly in front of everyone present. He spoke calmly but firmly, revealing what he had learned about the arrangement of the hunt, and made clear that such treatment of his bride would never be tolerated within his household again. Cordelia's face flushed with embarrassment as the guests exchanged glances, several of them recalling their own quiet amusement earlier that day with newfound discomfort. Elowen, seated near the Duke, did not gloat or add further words to her husband's rebuke. Instead, she simply asked if Tempest might be placed under her care from that day forward, explaining gently that the horse had never been given a fair chance to prove himself, much like she had not been given one upon her arrival. Her request, delivered with quiet dignity rather than triumph, seemed to soften even Cordelia's hardened expression, though pride kept her from speaking further that night. In the weeks that followed, Elowen worked with Tempest each morning, earning his trust with the same patience she had shown from the very first moment they met. The household staff, who had once viewed her with suspicion, began to greet her with genuine warmth, impressed by both her skill and her refusal to seek revenge against those who had wronged her. Even Cordelia, though slow to change, found herself watching Elowen with something closer to respect than resentment. By the time winter settled over Blackmore Hall, Elowen was no longer spoken of as an outsider forced into an arranged marriage, but as a woman who had earned her place through quiet strength rather than noble birth. The horse, once feared by everyone on the estate, now followed her calmly across the fields each morning, a living reminder of the day she had refused to be broken by those who underestimated her.